one thing I always recommend people do, if break out a couple of hours, and I'm old school, I love a Google spreadsheet. I would create your content goldmine. So I would go back through, if you've done audits or client calls, I love to get those transcripts, and I'll take those and convert those into something else. Maybe it's a new lead magnet. Maybe it's a new blog post. Maybe it's a new, training that I do, maybe free or paid, right? So going through that content goldmine of things that you've already created that you could link to, or you could pull from in a new way, it could inform what you're creating next. I think having that repository that you can go to, that's a great thing.
Welcome to the Web Design Business Podcast with your host, Josh Hall, helping you build a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hello, friend. Welcome into the first interview episode of the Web Design Business Podcast for 2025. I am absolutely pumped for some of the upcoming chats that are going to be released here on the show and some of the guests we have lined up for Q1. So I hope you're pumped as well. We're going to kick off this year with email and content marketing, specifically for web designers in 2025, one of the best ways to get leads and to get clients. And I'm really excited to share my chat here with an industry expert in all things design, digital strategy, and copywriting. This is Michelle Martello, who has worked with the likes of MTV, the National Park Service, Marie Forleo, and a ton of others. So she truly has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to how to market online and how to create words that help you get clients. So all that to say, I would hang on every word she says in this interview and implement as much as you can, because we're going to get into how to create a content goldmine that you can pick from ongoing for social media, for your blog, for your newsletter, etc. We're going to really dive into the power of having a newsletter in 2025, especially for those of you who have been thinking about it but haven't started one. How often to send emails and when is too much or when is too little. What content should be brief versus long form. And then, as the old Abe Lincoln quote goes, "He who sendeth the email getteth thy customer." Much more and all of that is covered in this episode. Again, Michelle was an absolute blast to talk to, a wealth of knowledge on this stuff. I could have chatted with her for like 8 hours. If you want to connect with Michelle after this, you can go to minimumdesigns.com. Of course, that will be linked in the show notes at this episode. In fact, we have a lot of links that we covered in this chat. And thankfully, Michelle actually followed through and sent me every link she mentioned in this chat. That can be found at joshhall.co/361. We do cover a lot, so I would recommend heading over there after this one. And of course, all of her links to her social media and her website will be over there at joshhall.co/361. Here is Michelle. Let's dive into our first interview of the year to talk content and email marketing for web designers. Well, it's great to have you, Michelle. I just mentioned email marketing is something that web designers I found tend to kind of like fall into because they start getting clients. We start building a business and then we're like, shoot, maybe I should actually email my clients more often. So you are a very welcomed specialist on this topic. So thanks for joining.
Oh, I'm so excited. I always tell folks I'm going to be at year 19 in my business, which is insane to me. And I tell people the biggest regret I have is that I didn't start my email list sooner. I was doing it for clients. I saw the power of it, but I was like, I get referrals. I don't need to worry about it. And I will tell you, when I started writing my email list and being consistent with it, I think that's important too. When I started getting really consistent with it, it opened up so many more opportunities. I cannot tell you how many folks were like, I've been on your email list for 2 years, waiting to work with you, waiting for an opportunity. And it helps you stay booked and busy and opens up so many other avenues of opportunity for you to make money, land clients, and build relationships.
Why is that, do you think? Is it because you're just top of mind? Is it more intimate because it's not on social media? All the above? Why do you think email led to all those opportunities?
All of the above. I think as designers, we can often get caught up in I know I definitely did with social media, it's got to look a certain way. I have to have an aesthetic and I like to change my mind every 5 minutes about what I'm going to design. Right. So it was always hard for me to be very proactive, if you will, on social media. But when I could be consistent with my newsletter, and I always in like Laura Belgray, who's one of my clients, talkingshrimp.com, she has a phrase, EFAB, email from a bestie. So you're writing like you talk. I came from the world of, I have a history degree. And when I started writing, I would write footnotes. I thought it had to be academic and had to be so, crisp and, all these things. And when I started writing with the notion of like, I'm kind of a fun person, but I'm kind of an introvert. A lot of us pixel pushers are, we're just behind the computer. We're not out speaking, not doing all these things. When I started writing and sharing my experiences and frankly, sharing what I was doing for other people, folks that were on my email list were like, oh, can you do that for me? And they would write me and I would just have an invitation if they wanted to, book a website audit or if they wanted to just write me with their experiences. It started creating this two-way communication and people feel like they know me. And now if I go to a conference or I speak somewhere, my husband laughs so hard because he's like, they'll come up and they'll be like, oh, I read your email. I love your emails. You're the only emails that I read. And it really fosters and nurtures this relationship. And it's been unbelievable for me, like the results that I've gotten out of creating these newsletters every week.
So that's what I was wondering is when people say build an email list and email, I think the big question that most everybody probably rightfully has is what type of emails are we talking? I'm very excited about the resurgence of good old fashioned like newsletters. Even that term was once dated and now it's cool again. For the sake of being top of mind, sake of being personal. I do love that. Did it start like that for you or did you just email a little more frequently, or when did the cadence and the frequency and the intentionality of like a newsletter?
I'm fortunate that I get to work with some clients that are pretty well known in the online business space. And, I was not consistent. I was maybe doing when I had something to sell or when I had a space or, I would maybe do every 4 weeks or 5 weeks. And then I told myself a few years back, I'm like, all right, if you're going to get consistent with this, be consistent with it, whether it's every 2 weeks or every week. Come up with a cadence. And I call my newsletter the nugget because I hate wasting people's time. Like I hate being on a webinar and it's a sales pitch the whole time. And I'm not actually learning anything of value. Like as web designers, we're just inundated with information that we have to learn. It's like, well, this week I'm learning about accessibility in newsletters. And next week I'm learning about like, what's the future of WordPress? It's like, where are we going with all of these things? And it's hard to stay on top of stuff. So my thinking is if I can write something of value every week or every other week where it helps even one person, I have a nugget that's like a little story. I'm very much a proponent of storytelling. And that comes from, again, both Laura Belgray and another one of my clients, Ann Handley, who has an amazing newsletter. She writes about writing, mainly for the B2B audience. And, learning from these folks of, well, you can have, fun with your newsletter. You can be informative. You can give people, something to nibble on, but then they're going to want to hire you to help implement for them. And so I think that's kind of the thinking is you do want to write with an end goal in mind. You're not just writing for the sake of writing. Like we want to reverse engineer, if you are trying to build your pipeline, say for the next year, maybe you want to build up your wait list. When I was really doing a lot more web design, I would try to keep a 3 to 6 month wait list. And so this was a great way to kind of say, hey, I've got some space opening, say second quarter. If you want to get on, I can put that as like an end note in my newsletter. And it's a great way to just always make sure you're booked and busy.
Mm-hmm. So that's the big thing, I think, with the idea of emailing is formatting and what these would look like. There's obviously so many different versions. We've all seen the emails that are really graphic heavy and some that are a little bit corporate and a little stale. I started mine actually just a year ago. I started mine, and mine's pretty casual and simple in the way of it's mostly text with some graphics. But it's interesting for web designers because this is very timely too. We just recently did a challenge in my community, Web Designer Pro, and it was a newsletter challenge. And we're 2 months out from it, and it's converted very well already for a lot. I just did a check-in with all my members, and so many have said my newsletter has already brought in quite a few clients, or my first client came from a newsletter because it's kept them top of mind. And I feel like the cool thing about newsletters is that it's not email. Like for me personally, I used to view email as sales, and that was it. It was like, if I email somebody, I'm selling something. But with a newsletter, like you said, it could be very story. It could be very educational. You don't need to sell anything if you don't want to. But this question of formatting is what I'm really curious for you. So let's just get into it. You have worked with some of the top minds in the business, Marie Forleo, quite a few others. What is working with the formatting? Is plain text with a link? Is it graphics? Are the GIFs? I know like a lot, like Amy Porterfield, I've had her on, like I'm on her email list. It's always a lot of GIFs. There's always like, something like that. What, does it all work? Is there something better?
Honestly, it depends on your audience. Like I can't give a blanket statement because everyone's going to have a different experience. Now, in my opinion, honestly, what's going to be easiest for you to produce is what's most important. And I think, again, as web designers, maybe sometimes we're creating these for, by the way, this is a great side business. If you're looking to add on to your web design business, I do still do a couple of newsletters for my clients. It's a great recurring revenue stream if you want to kind of, and actually setting up people's newsletters and doing all the forms and stuff. It's a great additional way to bring in some income. So I just want to put a pin in that. But what I would say with the formatting is I think often we make things too overwrought, and we do have to concern ourselves with, we can't really do video in newsletters. We can't really do a lot of images because you may get blocked. Like if you don't have your email newsletter, not to get too technical, but if you don't have your back end set up process, perfectly, with your DKIM, your SPF settings, like, your DNS settings are correct with, regards to, you validated your domain and all these things. If you don't have that stuff set up, you're not going to make it into the inbox. So the design and content is a moot point if you can't even get into the inbox. So that's the first thing you got to deal with. And then if you're like, well, I want to be consistent with it. If you are making some super high-end design thing that's hard for you to do and hard for you to commit to with all your other work, it's probably not going to happen. So again, you're not going to be creating consistently. Now, I am a big fan of creating kind of your own template. I use Kit, formerly ConvertKit. I'm a big fan of Kit because I find it's one of the easier systems to use. They have some great templates. You can also customize your own. If you know Liquid, the language, you can do even more customization. They've got some great free starter ones, a couple paid ones you can start with. Don't make it hard. I love a template. I think web designers should avail themselves more of templates to make their lives easier. And then I personally have my own little formula. Again, I call mine the nugget because I always have a little story. People love the stories. A little story. You can be as personal or not as personal as you want. If you don't want to write about your kids, if you don't want to write about, who your relationships and things, I tend to write a little bit more about my personal life, what I'm into. Again, a lot of my folks have traveled with me on my journey from solo web designer to being more in the online marketing space. And so I have my little story. I usually have, I'm teaching, doing some sort of teachable moment. Maybe it's a video. Maybe I'm sharing what I've done for a client as an example. Maybe it is a resource I've created. I try to have a mixture of things. Sometimes it can be a short one. Sometimes it can be a long one. One of the best performing emails, this is not mine. This is someone else created this, is a 9-word email. Say you've got folks on your list who expressed interest in working with you maybe 3 months ago, 6 months ago. One of the best things you can do is maybe you have a segment or a tagged part of your audience on your list, and you can just write those people, hey, are you still interested in a new website? Literally, that's all you have to write. You will be shocked how many people write back to you. Again, because it's not a huge old sales pitch. It's not like one of those, Sephora emails that's got all the pretty graphics on it. Like when you register all those graphics, you kind of see it innately as a sales email. So you might be more likely to disregard it. So that's, again, why I like to kind of write text-based primarily. I will throw an image or two because I think when you only have one image, they're more likely to click on it. Make sure, by the way, if you have an image in your email, that it is clickable. A lot of people miss that step. Mm-hmm. They just have an image. I can't tell you how many times someone's got that big old branded logo, which I'm not a huge fan of, by the way, big old branded logo that forces people to scroll, and then it's not even clickable to their site.
What about an image? Because you just called me out there, because I do have some images in mine, especially like in the bottom. So mine's formatted similar to where I have the email that's just text-based primarily. And then at the end, I'll have like a community member win, or maybe I did a video and I'll have a link, and they have their images. Sometimes they're linked, but sometimes they're not. So do you know if it's in that scenario, is that okay for an image not to be linked, or do you feel like all images should be linked?
I personally feel if you've got an image, it should go somewhere. At the very least, go to your website. Because again, if you've got a community win, well, I'm interested in that community. Let me go check it out. So maybe it's going to a landing page that's learning more about the community. So I always love to have a call to action. We always think about with websites, one page, what's the goal of the page? Like, what are we trying to get someone to do the next step? Same thing with your newsletter. Whether it's that prompting them to reply back to you, maybe you're saying, hey, if you want to learn more about the community, click here, give them a direction. So it's very, very obvious. You'll be shocked how many folks actually do click on things. I always like to do, we call them Easter eggs, right? I always like to put at the bottom of my emails, I put like a little note like, hey, I'm so glad you made it this far down. Here's a little, fun link of the week or something. I love to reward people and do a little bit of surprise and delight. Have fun with it, play with it, test things out. There are no absolutes. I think that's a mistake to think like all images, no images, like try things out. You don't know how your audience is going to respond, especially if it's a warm audience. Sometimes changing things up, being a bit of a disruption from your normal, maybe newsletter style, that might bring more awareness to what you're talking about.
I'll share a little thing that I learned with my newsletter over the past year. Because I really enjoy seeing the click maps.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. I'm shocked about how many folks are clicking like below in the like very bottom of the details. I recently put the overview of my story with links to like certain podcast episodes and stuff. And almost every link gets at least 1 or 2 or 3 clicks.
Yeah.
At the very, very bottom. But one thing I've noticed is that if I have a link that's like on its own line with a finger pointing to it, that's like, click here to check out Web Designer Pro, my community, that will not get near as many links as one that's just in a paragraph. That's like, in my community, Web Designer Pro, we did this week. And I think it's because it is a little more casual and it's a little... And this may be totally dependent on the size of an email. If it is just one link that people have to click, then obviously that's the way to go. But from what I've learned with multiple links in paragraphs and in a longer form newsletter, I have noticed interestingly more recently that, people are not clicking like the click here to check it out. They're clicking the casual one that's just mentioned offhand. And maybe it just feels less... not salesy, but it just feels more welcoming just to be like, what is this? I'm going to click this instead of being like,
I think it's contextual too, right? Because you're like, oh, here we had a win in this. And it's just like, well, I want to know about the win. I want to know like what someone, so you're right. It feels a little less salesy, a little bit more of like, hey, here's what we did in here. And it's like, and it's not even like, click here to do this thing now. It's, people are smart. They're going to click the link. They're like, well, I want to figure this out. So I love adding the context around it. I mean, I think when we think about, I subscribe to a ton of newsletters. So one of the ones that I read, there's a couple I read daily. One is Morning Brew, right? So Morning's Brew is great because it gives you an overview of kind of what's going on in the world, the markets. But then on Sundays, they do kind of a best of wrap up. And then this week they had a gift guide. And I loved that it was super scannable. I could tell at a glance, like the first 2 blocks are not for me, but then the third block, I'm like, oh, and it was super short and actionable. And I appreciate that. So, I think you have to strike a balance between like a ton of content, giving some context. And, I really am a big believer in clarity over cleverness. Like, don't try to use big falutin words and don't try to be super fancy. Like, be as clear as possible. Because you also don't know how many of your folks, because I'm assuming we're mainly speaking to a US audience, how many of your folks are an English first reader. They could be translating in their head from different languages. So again, trying to be as clear as possible with the language as to what it is and how it can help them will make a bigger impact.
It's funny because with my audience, it's mostly it's over 50 or 60% US from what I see in the demographics, but I do serve web designers all over the world. And a lot of folks who don't speak English first, they're often mentioning, because I'll use like hot dog or something. Just the way I talk in real life is the way I talk in my email. And for better or for worse, I've really stuck to that. And I often get like, you mentioned a hot dog in the business. I was like, sorry, it was like slang. So that is kind of, I don't know. It hasn't been a problem, but it has been an interesting thing when it comes to slang and different terminology.
Oh, yeah. You know what though? Food. I wrote this week. I did mine early. Normally I send on Fridays, but it's American holiday week this week when we're recording. And I wrote about how it's Thanksgiving week and I'm actually making a lasagna. I've had 10 people write me about my lasagna recipe. And I'm like, and again, this is where you may think you need to write about super technical stuff. I think this is a core thing that I want to mention. You're not writing for your peers. Now you might be because you're writing to a web design audience. I do have some web designers as well in my audience. But if you're writing for your clients, you're not writing about like JavaScript queries and you're not writing about, this WordPress upgrade and, all of these particular things. You're actually writing for the benefit of your clients.
Yeah.
So how can you connect with them? How can you make it understandable and accessible for them?
Side note, I think newsletters, regardless of if you're a web designer or service provider or like an online entrepreneur, it is the time to have like some just personal fun stuff in the mix. I just recently caught up with my SEO guru, who's also Michelle. You would love her. You guys are two peas in a pod, but she has a newsletter, and her most popular recent newsletter was about, she called it shower thoughts. And she found these shower sticky notes that you could, that are waterproof, that you could have in your shower. So when inevitably you get a great business idea, you could just jot it down. And she said the amount of responses that she got on that one, and she just had no, like, she didn't think anyone would think anything of it. But it just goes to show you that is one cool avenue about having a newsletter or email marketing that's more personal, is you could do something like that. That also is fun and cool for everybody too. It shows more than what's going on behind the persona of a web designer.
Oh, for sure. And, we love recommendations. I do a lot of like Zoom calls and Zoom trainings, and I'm on one team where we've got about a team of 5 that are behind the scenes. And I love our pre-Zoom meeting when we're just on sharing like, what we're using and like, makeup tips and, software products. And that's the most fun because we want to know what other people are using, because we want real. And by the way, it's another thing you can share in your newsletter or affiliate links, right? People want to know what you're using, and it doesn't just have to be tech stuff. That's the wild thing. The shower notes thing, I want to know what those shower notes are. So it's like, I want to know what other people are using for productivity, for life benefit, for their health and wellness. Like, don't feel like you have to restrain yourself to only talking about tech.
I needed to hear that because, as you mentioned, we're Thanksgiving week recording this, but For Christmas week, I was going to just send out a newsletter with my top favorite Christmas movies, completely non-web design business related, just to spice it up. So I was going to see how that goes. So I needed to hear that. I need to be reminded that not all my stuff and I think this is common because I feel like we think sometimes when somebody signs up for an email that we need to be showing up for them. Like they were, thoughtful enough to let me email them. I should be giving them constant value nonstop. But to your point so far, it's a great reminder that some people are taking in so much information that short to the point, less. Sometimes it doesn't need to be a big value thing. It could just be kind of fun. That tends to break through the noise. I feel like it's when it's fun, when it's unique, when it's personal. Great reminder. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, the more you write to, the more you kind of find your own rhythm. I tend to be I always struggle with like, I want to give so much. And so I have to restrain myself sometimes because it can overwhelm people. You have to remember we're pretty techie, but if we're trying to explain a concept or trying to explain something that's maybe just a little bit in the future, when ChatGPT first came out, all of us were so geeked, and a friend of mine actually launched a product that was just how she used ChatGPT. And I was like, this is brilliant. It was just a Google Doc with all the different ways she was using it. Now, this is literally the week that it launched because all of us were like, what is going on? Right. So we want to maybe think about how can we simplify things so it's not overwhelming. So we don't need to show them all the guts in the kitchen. They want to kind of see the end product and maybe how to get there. Like, what are the ingredients? What's the end product? Show me the cookbook with the picture.
Frequency, cadence.
Yeah.
So in the newsletter challenge we did for my community, my recommendation for web designers is monthly. I just think it's a great way to like put a tip out there or an educational thought. And then most of our members have backed it up with like a recent project, like a tool they recommend, maybe a testimonial or a case study. So it's a pretty meaty monthly newsletter, but at the same time, it's not something that's ridiculously huge or anything.
Yeah.
For most service providers, is that your recommendation, or when
I'm a big fan of more email, more money.
Okay.
More emails,
all right.
more money.
So
Yeah.
Yeah. For those who are like, I can barely keep up with one a month. What are your tips? Okay.
Yeah. Like I would actually take that email and break it out. If once a week is a lot, and I know that can feel like a lot of my clients, I have a few clients that do a regular newsletter. I think the every 2-week cadence can be really great. The problem with once a month is that, we're training inboxes, we're training people, right? We want them to be familiar with us. In fact, because I send my emails on Fridays at a particular time, if if I don't send one out that week, and sometimes I don't send to my whole audience, I may send a segment, I will hear from people like, are you okay? Like, because there's an expectation. Now, I don't want to set up unrealistic expectations, right? If you're a service provider, your head's down, you're doing the work. I like the idea of at least in every 2 weeks, because every month that's like, it's easier for people to just like, I can't remember who this person is, I'm going to unsubscribe. We find that the more you write, the more that people expect it, the more that they're actually going to stay on the list and take action. If it's just really random and in spurts, it feels a little inconsistent, and people are like, I can't remember why I'm on this list. I don't know what I need it for. So those are the things that I think about. I would rather see you break up that lengthy one into maybe a 2-parter, and maybe one's like the portfolio project of like, hey, if you want me to do this for you, maybe if you specialize in an industry, you want to share best practices or what's working for clients. I mean, that's what people want to see. Like, I want to know that if I get a website from you, it's going to bring me clients, traffic, subscribers, whatever they're looking for. It's a very different marketplace than 15, 20 years ago, when literally you could just throw up a website and get clients. You really have to have some thought and intention and strategy behind stuff to make things work these days. And so I think the more that you can kind of hone in on the results that your client got versus just like, ooh, this pretty thing that I created, you're going to have a much better uptick in clients. And you're going to build this loyal following of like, oh, I can't wait to be able to work with that person.
Sold. All right, there we go, friends. It's every other week.
Make more money. There you go.
Yep. Well, the reality is too, like you mentioned, with a big meaty monthly newsletter, it can absolutely be broken out into 2 or 3 emails at least, probably. Yeah. And if even two a month sounds like a lot for web designers, I would just recommend thinking about that idea of just taking, instead of that case study being, or that portfolio piece being on the bottom of one, make that the one and just share a bullet list of what you did. And that's it. Gosh, I so need to be reminded of just keep it simple, keep it short. I'm notorious for just going like way too, I mean, I write like a chapter of a book sometimes for my newsletters. And I'm like, every once in a while that can be worthwhile, but I'm reminding myself like, go simple. And I might give myself a bit of a test, because selfishly, I want to use some of our time as coaching, because I'm kind of at a place where I'm like, I love my newsletter, but I think I'm my own worst enemy with it because I make it too meaty. And what's happened more recently is I'm like scrambling to get to them. Yeah. And I have so much content. I've been doing this brand for 7 years. So I have oodles of content I can repurpose, but sometimes I feel weird about going into a course lesson and taking a piece, because I don't know. Part of me is kind of fine with that sometimes, but I'm almost in like I need to make it easier and more efficient. I feel like I've got myself, because I'm also doing weekly podcasts and I've got courses to revamp. I'm running a community. I've got YouTube videos. Like, it's almost, and that's another kind of aspect of this is like, if it's a part of other content, what would your advice be to me who's feeling like sometimes the newsletter is the piece that overwhelms me sometimes?
It's, we're on this content hamster wheel, right? Realistically. And it's like, especially if you're also working, I don't know if you're still working with clients. So if you've got,
that's been, that's kind of made me feel like, why can't I do a weekly newsletter? I'm not doing service work now. This is the only thing I do. I should be able to do a weekly newsletter.
Oh no, you're actually working more now. That's the myth of content creator world. The content creator economy is that like, I'll be working less. No, because you know what? You're always thinking about content, right? So
right.
A few things that I do, and I'm not a huge like 5-year planner kind of person. I'm not one of those I've got my entire years of social media planned out. I am not that person. I also think it's a mistake with the world and the state that it's been in, I don't know, the last 4 to 5 years. I think it's a mistake to pre-schedule everything, because you actually want to stay nimble and flexible when inevitably there's something that's happening this week. I'll be honest, there are some weeks I don't send a newsletter because I'm like, you know what? There's a collective, going on. I'm not adding to any more noise.
Interesting. So it's not religiously every week.
No, I mean, I try to stay consistent. I think there's been 3 weeks this year. I also had some medical stuff. So I did take, I let my folks know. But like, there's been a couple times when I'm just like, you know what? Not adding to the noise this week. I even had something written and I'm like, it doesn't feel authentic to me. And that's not a word I love to use, but I know there's some people who will plow on no matter what is happening in the world. I don't operate that way. And so, because again, it's just me, I'm a personal brand. I don't have this huge organization behind me. It might be different if I was like Coca-Cola and I'm sending, or Sephora and I'm sending my, newsletters. It's not. I'm a personal brand. And so for me, sometimes I choose not to engage. And that's okay. I want to give people permission. If the world is ended, like if you've got a family member sick, you're just dealing with life, the newsletter doesn't go out. The world is not going to end, right? And I think we have to give ourselves some grace and permission with that. I know that said, knowing how much you're drawing from, how can you keep it actually exciting for you? Because if you're not excited to write it, if you're like, oh, I got to write this thing, it's going to come through in your writing. So a few things that I do to help myself is that I keep a nugget pile. So I'm old school. I use Evernote for all my note taking. And when I'm just in daily life, I hear these stories or I see these stories or I have these like teachable moments and I'm like, ooh, and my husband laughs at me because he's like, that'd be good for the newsletter, because we now have like a thing of like, yep, that would be great for the newsletter. And so I'm always storing these little things of these little, and it could just be a little life lesson. It could be something that I have a lot of friends who run their own businesses. And so I'm always capturing ideas about customer service and support and what's working and what's not working. And, how are people like going off the rails these days of just like, well, how do you manage, irate customers? How do you manage your own, temperament when dealing with this stuff? A lot of the stuff that's psychological, not just the technical, right? So this is a lot of stuff we don't talk about in web designer world of like, sometimes we're managing clients that are just crazy pants, and how do we do that without losing our own, what? And so I'm always learning from these lessons. And so I keep a whole pile, and sometimes they're just an idea. Sometimes they're paragraphs. And so knowing I always have this repository, which I call this your content goldmine. So for you, what I would suggest, one thing I always recommend people do, if break out a couple of hours, and I'm old school, I love a Google spreadsheet. I would create your content goldmine. So I would go back through, if you've done audits or client calls, I love to get those transcripts and I'll take those and convert those into something else. Maybe it's a new lead magnet. Maybe it's a new blog post. Maybe it's a new, training that I do, maybe free or paid, right? So going through that content goldmine of things that you've already created that you could link to, or you could pull from in a new way, it could inform what you're creating next. I think having that repository that you can go to, that's a great thing. And then the next thing I do, and it's not anything crazy special, but knowing when I have particular launches. So I do both launches for myself, my client, and then my clients, and then affiliate launches for things that I'm promoting. I know roughly, in the year, okay, January, I'm going to be doing this. February, I'm going to be doing this. I'm going to pencil in kind of tentative titles or tentative ideas for just each week. No more structure than that, honestly. And so that way I've got an understanding of like, okay, I've maybe got the next 6 to 8 kind of mapped out in my head. So that way it just makes my life easier, because I do write them weekly in the moment. I try to write them a few days before my Friday deadline, so I'm not scrambling. Not going to lie, sometimes they happen on Thursdays. But having that has made my life so much easier, rather than Thursday, I'm twiddling my thumbs like, what am I going to write about today? I have that kind of go-to resource library or the content nugget area that I'm like, ooh, this is a good lesson. And then sometimes things literally happen that day that I want to write about. Things that somebody had asked me, I'm a coach in a forum, and somebody was like, how does your lighting look so good? I'm like, oh, I could do a whole Black Friday thing on like my favorite tech tools. I wrote it literally in like 30 minutes. And, that's going to generate revenue for me. And I wasn't even planning on doing it, but I was like, everything's on sale half off this week. Why wouldn't I share this with folks so that they can benefit from it?
I love the term content goldmine. I don't have like an official place for that. I have separate spreadsheet of ideas for the newsletter and for podcasts and YouTube, but it's a good reminder to have a better system for that. I think that is the issue. It's funny though. I had the newsletter kind of planned out for like 3 months. And then once I got to those topics, I was like, I don't really want to talk about that this week. Like one of my members had a great win. I'm going to repurpose this. So similarly, I've kind of gone a little bit more week to week in the way of like what I really am interested in, what I'm keen on, but I do have essentially a gold mine. I definitely never run out of ideas. The problem is overwhelm almost. There's like, what should be a newsletter? What should be a blog? What should be a podcast? What should be a YouTube video? That's kind of the issue. I think a lot of content creators and even web designers probably get to that place too. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you have any tips on that of different categories or buckets of content.
Well, what I would say is, you're probably already doing this, but if you've written a blog post, well, that blog post is a newsletter. That is a YouTube video. That one thing should be broken out into multiple things, right? And so like I have this one blog post, I'm very proud of it. I ranked #1 on Google for it. It's like 4 or 5 years old at this point, and I just keep adding to it. It's this thing that I can continually reference. And it's, for example, it's all about how to create, record, and sell your guided audio meditation. It was a question that I kept getting from my audience, right? So this is, if you're thinking about content as a web designer or as a content creator, someone who's listening to this, what are the questions you continually hear from your audience? This to me is part of your content goldmine, because this is, frankly, in some ways, user-generated content. They keep asking you these questions. Why not build your own repository to answer those questions? You're doing that through your podcast and your YouTube videos. Guess what? You know what you could do as maybe a quarterly thing? I love this. I love when people actually curate their own work for me. So Creator Science, Jay Klaus does this very well. So he's got his own resources page where everything's kind of in, are you learning to do X? Are you learning to do Y? And it's all your best articles and videos and things. Guess what? That repository link is a newsletter of just like, here's you want to get inside my brain, here you go, right? So if we think about how can we, again, best serve our audience and not overwhelm ourselves, sometimes it's just curating our own stuff because we forget how much we have produced. And so I would even say for you, quarterly, a newsletter that's just like a reminder of your best stuff. And do not worry about repeating yourself. I actually will go back. And something I've been doing actually is I have a list of, I've probably written maybe 500 emails at this point. I have a whole spreadsheet. And I've been slowly taking the best ones that are timeless and making them into blog posts. And you forget how much you write. And by just doing that, I'm getting inspiration and taking some of these and rewriting them slightly to be new newsletters. It's not cheating. You're leveraging, you're learning from the past. Like everything you've done in the past is informing the next thing you're creating. So to me, this is a great way of just saying, oh, I've revisited this idea. Here's how I feel about it for, this next year going forward. Here's how we felt about it 4 years ago. The landscape has changed. Here's what I'm recommending now. People love pros and cons. People love opinions. Like we've all got opinions about like what themes to use, what software to use, like what not to use.
Do people want to read Spicy Josh? Because I can start Spicy Josh can start coming out.
Know, I do. I mean, I'm an affiliate for many things, and I will be dead honest about do not use it for X, Y, Z. Like, trust me on this. Just trust me because, I know their email deliverability is not great or whatever, use it just for this. I don't believe in all-in-one tools because they rarely do everything great. People love opinions because you're building this trusted relationship. And I used to call myself as a web designer, a visual therapist. I can't tell you how many folks would end up crying with me because they are putting themselves out visually in a medium in a way that they'd never done before. We're really helping these folks.
It's so true. It's so funny.
Right? You've been there, right? It's just
well, we just had this conversation recently. One of my members, Angela, she actually works with wellness brands and yoga instructors and therapists and stuff. And she told me on a coaching call, she was like, I kind of feel like a web design therapist. And I was like,
100%.
That is literally your new title. I was like, I want you to put that in your email signature. And she has. She's like, she's kind of like the web therapist now for her clients. And it's gone over really well. It's so true. And as you were talking about that, well, gosh, a lot of thoughts. I love the idea of moving from creation to curation.
Yeah.
I think that is key, especially for folks like myself and even web designers who have been doing a lot of content over the span of months or years. It's amazing how much, and I have to remind myself, not everyone has seen my video from 5 years ago.
Oh, so 100%. And even if they may have forgotten.
Reminders. Yes. Gosh, this is so needed.
I would go back and look at your most, Ann Handley has a great metric, and I can't remember the exact phrase, but it's a metric you can't really measure. It's not like open rate or click-through rate. It is how many people reply back. And so I would look at the ones that you remember as like, what did I get the most responses to? They're probably more personal. They're probably where you're sharing, like where you struggled, and maybe how you overcame it. I would go back and look at those and revisit those. I think it's a good time, especially this time of year is a great time for reflection. You're visioning what you want for the next year. Not everything has to be a super technical, here's how you do X, Y, Z. A lot of times, I will tell you, so many people just want to be heard and seen. Mm-hmm. And if you can provide a space for that, again, I'm not saying we're qualified therapists, right? But I just want to make sure, we all keep our own boundaries, which can be tough too. But a lot of times people just want to be recognized. I can't tell you how many folks I worked with who don't have supportive spouses or partners. They're starting these businesses and no one believes them. And a good friend of mine just opened her third studio space. And this is someone who literally came from nothing. And I'm so proud of her. And she wrote me the most beautiful card. And she's just like, you and your husband allowed me to dream and no one has allowed me to do that before. And I'm like, you can pay me all the money in the world, but you can't beat that. I mean, come on, it's just like having that kind of impact on people. And you may not think that happens as a web designer, but it totally does because you're allowing them to see their dream come through.
And something I want to circle back around to that you talked about a little bit ago, I want to make sure I didn't glance over this. And that is when somebody gets into the trap of like, well, what am I going to write about? I got to come up with like a 12-month content plan. First of all, the gold mine, the content gold mine, the thoughts, that should take care of it there. My recommendation is FAQs, like you talked about. What are the common questions that clients are asking you? The other little gold mine I feel like is an email. When clients are asking questions and you're just casually saying like, well, I'd recommend this, or even during a proposal, if you're like, these are the common call to actions that we see work. Yeah. Don't overlook that. I was reminded of this just recently because I polled my community and DM'd everybody and asked about how their year has gone. And as I was kind of coaching and responding back to people, I'm like, gosh, these little nuggets of things that I'm kicking back are like a year's worth of newsletters. Just that. So I need to go back through and don't think you have to come up with everything on your own. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I'm a very independent person. I never, I've worked on teams. I never wanted to grow a big agency. I lived that life for a few years and I just didn't want to do that for myself, but don't feel like you have to do it alone. I think what you said is so smart. It's just like, recognize what people are saying. Right. Some of the best intel I can get is not from just like, how do you rate this program 1 to 10? That's not going to tell you anything, but actually get on a phone call. I know we don't love to do this, but get on a phone call with someone for like 10 or 15 minutes, survey your audience, actually do customer research. You're going to learn so much. I still do a lot of like one-on-one training with folks. I help one of my yoga philosophy teacher. I've been helping him and his partner is kind of starting to handle all the email marketing. And so I'm like, let's just get into Kit. And you ask me questions like, what do you want to do? Because I can make assumptions on what they want to do. But if they tell me like what they're trying to do, I can help guide them with like, oh, I know exactly. Let's do it together so you can learn and be empowered to do it yourself. Like, I love that because I'm learning how someone else is using a tool. Because I'm sure you've heard this, so many stories of, people have been burned by web designers and they don't know how to update their website. I'm like, that to me is a travesty when people cannot manage their own website. Trust me, as web designers, you're going to have plenty of work. Don't lock it down for people. Let them do stuff. Teach them how. You're going to have more work. And frankly, you don't want to be doing text updates anyway. It's the whole reason I learned WordPress in like 2008, because I was tired of manually updating websites. Well, and I think one of the big aspects to that too, when it comes to either an audit or polling your audience, that provides not only like content and newsletter creation, but actual website copy. I did a big audit for my community over the summer. And one hidden benefit of that audit was it became my new sales page, which is at webdesignerpro.com. Like, I did not anticipate that audit being all of the content gold I needed for the sales page, because everyone was super clear about challenges and wins and what was working really well in pro and what they needed some more help with or what they felt was lacking. And all of those commonalities and similarities were like super glaring, like, oh, duh, why didn't I think of that? Because I didn't need to go to a coffee shop and sit and, what are my members' biggest challenges, when I can just ask them and then they lay it out. So what a great prompt for web designers to just talk to your clients, poll them, ask them one-on-one in a group, Yeah,
Oh, and
whatever that
get
looks like.
testimonials. I wanted to share, I do have 2 resources for your folks, and I'll share the links with you so we can put them in the show notes. But one, I do have a blog post on your content goldmine. So I'll share that with you about all the different places to look and how to create your own content goldmine. And then the other thing is getting great testimonials. So I actually have a whole process where I ask 7 questions. And again, this is something else I would have done much, much earlier in my web design career. I formulated this process where as soon as I was done working with someone, and whether that was a website audit, whether it was a web design or whatever project we'd done together, when they were at their happiest, by the way, like right when you launch and they're super happy and they paid you that last check, that's when you send them this form. And so it used to be my testimonials of like, Michelle was so great to work with. Well, that doesn't tell anybody anything. Mm-hmm. Now we're addressing all sorts of things because it's 7 questions, and I just send them to a form. You could use something like testimonial.to. There's a whole bunch of like platforms that you can use to collect and gather testimonials. But I just use a simple Wufoo form, and it's 7 questions. And I give them space to give me feedback. Like, what were your hesitations? And usually it's cost. I mean, it's almost always cost, right? What were your hesitations? Have you benefited? I've got a whole blog post with these questions. Feel free to lift and blend, as I say, use it for yourself.
I love that.
And so those radically changed the type of testimonials I was getting. They're so long. I think, I always hear this when I'm doing audits for folks. They're like, I'm like, why are your testimonials like 1 sentence long? They're like, well, I didn't want to put too much on there. I'm like, people read all of it. When I first worked with a business coach, this was many, many years ago. And he had a testimonial page that if you printed it out, it was 60 pages. And he told me, I was like, this is insane, right? He's like, I have clients who have read every single one, and I know because they reference them. So don't be afraid of having a long testimonial. I know I read those long ones on Amazon, right? You're reading the 5-star, the 1-star. You're like, I want to know what's up with this. Or the Airbnb reviews. People read reviews. So get those testimonials, and don't hesitate to put the ones like, I was kind of worried about the cost, but she blew me out of the water, and here's the result that I got. That's what people want to see.
And you can always, what I've learned to do is just to clip out or like highlight something that was catchy.
Exactly.
Like Maggie, one of my members, one of my best testimonials ever, she sent me like this 3-paragraph testimonial. But in there, it was like at the very end, she was like, only join pro if you're ready to move up to the next tax bracket. And I was like, that's gold. It.
Ooh,
that's it right there. So it's on my page. If you want to check it out, go to webdesignerpro.com.
That's
it's at the very,
so good.
It's under the pricing. It's under the join table because she said that. And I was like, that is great. So I moved that up and then kind of, spliced everything around that. So,
yeah. I mean, that's the thing too. Like, we struggle sometimes with sales pages and creating our offers and all the rest of it. Let the people do the work for you. Like, they're going to talk about the experience, and they're going to have that. You're going to have that on your sales page or on your offer page or your pricing page or whatever. And that's what's going to sell people.
Speaking of selling people, we've talked mostly as far as email marketing about newsletters, which I figured we would. But what about sequences? Because this is where, this could be a whole different conversation, but sequences I know are so powerful.
Yes.
Especially if you get somebody into a lead generator and you want to guide them through to an ending point. This also kind of, I feel, maybe not conflicts, maybe that's not the right word, but it also could get jumbled in with a newsletter. If you're sending a sequence in with a newsletter, I've worried about this with some of my sequences because getting one joining pro and being on the newsletter, and if they had signed up for a free guide, it may be like,
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah.
I guess there's no more question other than just like, what are your thoughts about sequences and how to use those?
Yeah. Well, I think your first question was great about like, I don't want to inundate people. And I totally get that. So I mitigate that a couple of ways. Again, I use Kit, which I find is very, very easy to use. Because I send my newsletters on Fridays, I actually just choose not to send any sequences on Fridays. That's a simple way of doing things. I also tag folks when they first join my list as a new subscriber. So new subscribers don't get my regular broadcast. So that way, if I do send on the off chance I send one on a different day, like this week I sent on a different day because it's a holiday. That way I'm not inundating folks, because I will have people, I have multiple lead magnets on my website, and I will have people download like 5 different lead magnets. And so I want to make sure I'm not sending things a bunch of times. I also make sure my welcome sequence, they only go through it one time. So no matter when they download something, they're only going to get that welcome sequence one time. I love a welcome sequence because here's the thing. When someone first signs up for our list, that's when they're most excited to work with us. And if you're not going to email them for, say, a month from now, what you can do in the meantime, let's just say you're on that monthly cadence. What you can do in the meantime is maybe have a 3 to 5, email welcome sequence. And there's a lot of, industry variation about what this looks like. I personally don't like to email more than one a day when I'm doing a welcome sequence. I know some people that will do 2 or 3 a day and they make buckets of money. Again, it's not just something that it doesn't really sit right with me. So I don't do it that way. Now, I like to have a series that first one probably introduces who you are, your expertise, how you can help people. And I always like to give, again, a little nugget. So maybe it's a freebie download. For example, I have, for web designers, I have a great thing about how to get and retain premium clients, which I'll share with you as well, right? So if they're that, I also have a website checklist, like a simple checklist to test on your website, the 10-minute checklist to make sure your site's ready for clients, leads, and sales. Those are my 2 really good opt-ins that I have. And I want to make sure maybe they opted into something else, but I want them to see that. So that's maybe on my welcome newsletter. Yeah. Then the next day, I'm going to send them maybe a little bit more about myself. Again, I'm going to share some resources. Probably day 3, 4, I have some on-demand products. I'm selling them into that. If they've already purchased the on-demand product in my welcome sequence, I have it so that if they own it, again, using Kit, you can do this. It can tell if someone's tagged a certain way. You can hide and show things. My techie web designer friends will love its conditional responses, right? So if it's this, don't send them that, right? So we can really customize things. You don't have to go this nerdy, but I love that I have that capability. And
I think that's key for this situation, because my question would be like, if someone signs up for your main newsletter and they get a free lead generator 2 days later and they signed up for something, well, there's 3 different sequences there. It's like, you're getting destroyed.
And I would say too, do you even need 3 separate sequences? So a lot of times we overcomplicate things. I personally, at this point, only have 1 welcome sequence. And so I funnel everything into that. I've made it so that it's applicable to the majority of my audience. Now, because you have this membership, you may want to go a different route. It just depends. I think a lot of times we can overcomplicate things and it feels, oh God, this is overwhelming. Because then you have to make sure all 3 sequences are up to date. Right. So I'm always future-proofing stuff because, as a web designer and who runs okay, if I buy this plugin now and it's made by one dude, is it going to be supported in 2 years? Is it still going to be around? I'm always thinking about this kind of stuff. Because again, I've been doing this 20 some years. And so you're thinking about okay, what am I doing now? Am I going to have to edit in the future? So I will say the last email in my sequence, and I think you had Michelle Warner on your podcast as well, right? She's got a whole welcome sequence that's really, really smart. Follow her too. I love, by the way, I have a fake email address that I sign up for everybody's welcome sequences on, so it stays out of my main inbox, but I'm always doing research and learning behind the scenes. That's my big trick. I have a completely separate Gmail account that I open up in a different browser, so it's not even part of my main workflow, so it doesn't distract me. But my last email in that sequence, I have, here's how you can work with me now. So let's say you're a web designer and you've got a wait list, or maybe you have an opening right now. Maybe you're hey, 1 spot open for next month. Click here to get on the wait list. People are going to self-select what they're interested in. So I promote a few programs. I have some, strategy calls. I do audits. So I have ways that they can work with me now and in the future. And they'll let you know just with a simple click. Because when you click on something, you can set a link trigger in Kit, and you can do this in other software tools as well. But now I'm automatically building wait lists for things. And so what I'm going to do is I'm tagging and segmenting my list. So now in the future, maybe I've got an opening. Let's just say I do take on a new high-end client next year. If I got space, I'm going to first hit up that segment of my list who said they were interested because they're already warm for it. Yeah.
Well, it's a great tip with the sequences to not worry about sequences on every little thing. I think that's the trap I ran into, is thinking about, doing a sequence for this one and for this one. At one point I had one for joining the podcast versus the newsletter. And then it was and then for new customers. And then all of a sudden I've got 8 sequences to keep up with.
Oh yeah.
And as you mentioned, it's easy to set up not easy to sustain.
To maintain, yeah. And I have a client who has essentially 3 separate businesses. And for her, we have her main welcome sequence. We actually address each one of the businesses on a day. And so that's how we manage it. And then we do probably every 6 months to a year, we go in and just make sure everything's updated. So for you, I could see your podcast being one day of the welcome sequence. And I would highlight the top 3. Like, don't overwhelm people. I know you've got like dozens and, of great things. Again, we're curating, not creating more. So we want to curate what is the one thing I want people to remember about me? What is I used to be a really big yogi, and I still go to a lot of workshops. If I go to a 90-minute workshop, if I remember one key thing, I am super happy, because if you inundate me with a bunch of information, I'm probably not going to remember it tomorrow or the next week. So, but if you talk to me about one thing and you keep talking about that one thing, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, he's the web design business podcast guy. Right? What do you want to be known for? Mm-hmm. Put that into their heads, right? And so that way, again, you're curating the information so that they know exactly what you can help them with.
That's my word for 2025 for sure. Curate. Is to go from creation to curation.
There you go.
Absolutely. Great time. This has been like half coaching call for me too. So this is wonderful. You mentioned Michelle Werner. So she's actually just a couple episodes prior to you. Actually, the last 3 guests have been all Michelle's. So
hey, you know
Michelle
what?
Werner, my SEO consultant, Michelle Bourbonniere, and then you. So
awesome.
It's just been a month of awesome Michelles.
Oh, good to be part of it. Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious. So I wonder, are there any other gaps in email marketing that you would like to address other than, we've talked a lot about newsletters, we've talked about sequences. I mean, I wonder if you have all those, is there still a need for email promotions per se, unless there is a sale or an offer that expires? What other types of email should or should not be included?
I mean, I've got a guide that I'll share in the show notes as well about like literally dozens of different ways that you can leverage your email list for money, power, and prestige, right? So all the different things you can do. I've helped friends get jobs through my newsletter. I've made networking connections for folks. I've crowdsourced funding for, disasters, or when friends need help. When you've started to create and cultivate this community, it's so powerful what you can do with it. You can, of course, sell products, promote for other people. If you've got openings, if I've done retreats, I've done, speaking engagements, I've done events, and I've filled them all through folks on my list. And so it really is just such an amazing tool beyond social media. I mean, listen, I go down some Instagram rabbit holes for sure. I am not one of those like wannabe, dancing on, I love to dance, but I don't want to be dancing on Instagram. You know what I mean? And so for me, this is a way that I can be consistent, engage with my audience, and be effective. Like, I'm able to help so many people. Like, it's crazy. I might share a recipe. I might ask for support. In fact, one of the things that I've done, don't be afraid to ask. This is, when Michelle Werner probably talked about making an ask of folks, you can ask people for help or ideas. People love to share their opinion, right? So sometimes I'll be like, well, what do you use for X? And people will write me back. I did once, last year, I was like, you know what? I want to start speaking more and just like, I'll speak anywhere. Right. And so I reached out to my newsletter and I said, hey, if you've got a platform, I don't care if it's, as long as it's virtual, pretty much. If you've got a platform, invite me to speak. And so I've spoken in classrooms. I've done like 3 different universities. I've done podcasts. And so don't be afraid to make an ask. It doesn't have to be a one-way situation. It really is a 2-way communication tool if you let it be.
Let's hit on quality over quantity as far as list size, because as you very well know, web designers are probably not going to have a huge list. No. It's going to be clients. It's going to be partners. It's going to be maybe some people sign up for a lead generator, or, local networking events and business cards and stuff like that. This was a big kind of pain point when we did the challenge in pro recently. Is a lot of web designers were like, well, my list is only like 17 people or 40 people. My rebuttal to that though was, yeah, but these are 17 people who are most of them are probably paying you. Yeah. So a list of like 30 people for a web designer, in my mind, is actually way more valuable than a list of 3,000 people with, the dancing person on TikTok who is an influencer, but doesn't actually have any good quality leads per se as far as paying them. So can you speak to that with small but mighty?
I mean, my favorite metric is if you had 40 people in your office right now, would you not feel overwhelmed? Think about it. How many clients do you need in the year? 10, 5, 20, how many clients do you need?
Right.
I am so honored that most of my clients are on my email list. They read my emails. And in fact, a lot of times they'll respond. They'll be like, hey, can we do that for me? Because I'll be writing about what I'm doing for other clients. And I may have forgotten to tell them about it and be like, oh yeah, we can totally do that for you. So look at it as an additional communication tool that is supportive and nurturing of the folks that you have and the potential folks in the future. Again, I also love it as a networking tool of sharing other people. I've got my SEO friends. I've got Michelle. Michelle and I actually just did a joint venture a couple of months ago. So I'm able to share her work with my audience. She's able to share me with her audience. So it can be, again, such a collaborative tool. Sometimes we get very obsessed with the numbers and the metrics, and it's hard, especially if you're comparing to say an online business guru, right? Well, frankly, a lot of their leads are trash. They're probably spending a ton of money on ads. Probably not a lot of their folks are vetted. If you're cultivating smartly folks who are interested in what you have to say, they want to hear from you. They respect what you have to say. I will say one tool that has been fantastic is Kit has something called the Creator Network. So it's free. So you do have to be on the creator plan. However, this is a tool that when someone signs up for someone else's list, they can recommend your list. And I can't tell you how many hundreds of people I've added to my list from this one free tool. It's amazing. And these are folks who are interested in what I have to say.
Does that work for categorically too? Sorry, for as for web designers, is there a web designer category?
Yeah, there's a bunch on there. In fact, if you know Rafal Tamal, some other folks on there that I highly respect are over on Kit. In fact, some of them make newsletter templates, which could be also of interest to folks. If you're looking to expand your product line, you can do websites, you could do a newsletter template for Kit. That would be a really smart thing to do, potentially for your client, potentially to sell on an ongoing basis. But yeah, they basically you want to set up your creator profile. In there, you're going to have your kind of description, who you are, what you do, and then what you write about. And so maybe your specialty is you build websites for the restaurant industry, or in my case, I got known as a yoga studio website designer. So I was primarily writing for that community. I stumbled into it and it made me quite successful because people would then share me. And what's really interesting is some of my very first clients from 2006 are still on my newsletter list. They've purchased additional products. They've actually come to events with me. People will go on the journey with you. It's so fascinating to see the progression of where we are in our lives almost 20 years later. This
may be a great closing point too, is that idea of somebody being on a list for years, because what I found with my newsletter, and I've heard this said over and over by folks who have had newsletters for years, is that one of the benefits is staying top of mind, whether it's weekly or biweekly or monthly. And then when somebody is staying connected with you, when they're ready, they haven't forgot about you. They know where to go, especially for businesses who maybe don't need a website right now, but maybe next year they are ready. And if you've been top of mind, boom, you are top of mind as the web designer to move forward with.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, also don't discount getting featured in other people's newsletters. So I think this is, one tactic that I learned many years ago. Again, I was in the yoga studio business. I knew the guys who created a widget for MindBody Online. MindBody Online is the default software that almost every single yoga studio uses. And I got to know the guys who made a widget that was built on to MindBody Online. I got noted as a featured vendor, a featured website creator. And I can't tell you how much attention that got me because I was featured in their content, their materials and newsletters. Getting featured in someone else's thing that's reaching your target audience, borrowing audience, again, another thing Michelle Warner loves to talk about. Borrowing audience is one of the smartest things you can do. So, again, someone may not be ready for you right now. I mean, I've for sure had folks say, I've been on your newsletter 2 years and I was waiting for you to have an offer just for me. And when I launched my Smart Mail course last year, all about how to use email marketing, they were like, this was the one for me. I needed this particular offer. And so that they're cued into you. They love what you have to say. They trust you. And, sometimes people just have to be ready for it. It's like that other thing I mentioned earlier about doing that 9-word email. So many times people will reach out and they say, oh, I want a website. And I always recommend, a friend told me this many years ago, 50% of sales happens in the follow-up. Following up with people, and you can do it using your newsletter, right? Remember I talked about having a tag or segment of maybe interested clients, previous clients, reach out to those folks first. You can also manually write them. You don't have to do it through a newsletter, but having that kind of list of folks in the wings is such a smart way to just stay booked and busy.
And that's the benefit of having a small list, is it can be very personal. It's almost like a direct sales line without being salesy, is having 40 people who you do encourage them to respond back and then reply back and get those conversations going that inevitably lead to opportunities in sales. I mean, it sounds like, I would imagine that's exactly how you built your list and built your network, is just using the email as the glue to have all these conversations, but yet you're able to stay top of mind, able to share wins, refer others and build your persona like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Real quick, sponsorships.
Yes.
Is yours sponsored, or is yours just?
Not yet. It's something I've thought about. A couple of my clients do it. I like to retain control over what I put in my newsletter. So I've been a little reluctant. Now, that said, I do have one client. He's brilliant. He's actually sold his business again, but he built up a newsletter, and its primary revenue stream was sponsorships. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I was wondering how you felt about that, just because I wondered if that, I don't think that nowadays it would detract or deter anybody from reading, especially if it's in a thoughtful, you could still do your thing. And then, by the way, this is sponsored by blank.
I think Justin Welch does a great, he kills it. He's got a list of 200,000, but, and I want to say at this point, I think he's charging $3,000 a pop for sponsorship. That's a huge revenue stream for him. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think if it makes sense and it's in line with your ethics, I think it's fine. I'm a big person when it comes to ethics and marketing. I think you have to have complete transparency. If you've got affiliate links, you have to tell people. It's also the law, right? So I think being mindful about it, a lot of this stuff. And frankly, a lot of folks who are writing newsletters, and that's their main contribution. If they're not maybe service providers, they're more in this content space. That's how they generate revenue. I have absolutely no problem with it as long as it's transparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm kind of crossing that. I've done some sponsorships, but I haven't done it weekly just because I find it overwhelming trying to manage everything. Although I actually talked to Justin. So you mentioned Jay Klaus earlier. He's a buddy of mine. Actually, he's local to be here in Columbus. We've known each other for a while. And I joined his community this year, largely to learn about some of these other areas as a creator that I
think it's so smart. Yeah. I'm a big believer in multiple revenue streams for sure.
Yeah. I've definitely been I did talk with Justin about that because I told him, I was like, dude, I have literally companies emailing me and I'm just turning them down. Well, right now I'm just collecting a list, but I was like, I just don't have the bandwidth to create a new sponsorship package and manage it right now. But it's on
That's a good thing for Q1 or Q2 of next year. I love that,
exactly.
Not that I want to go coaching, but I love that for you of if you're take a day. I think one of the things we don't do, I didn't do this for years as a web designer, is just take time to really kind of do a little bit of dreaming for ourselves. We're so much in the doing of okay, I need to do. Take a day or a couple of days or a week just to dream. Let yourself what do I really want to create? You don't have to do it all. My husband and I will do this sometimes where we'll just sit on the porch and be okay, let's think of all the people we know and make a list of well, what are they doing now? Can we check in with people, right? When you have these kind of repositories, again, it's like a person gold mine. We've got a content gold mine, an idea gold mine, allow yourself to have the space to kind of dream things without immediately redacting them. Because that's a lot of times we're it's too much work. I'm not going to do it. It's kind of like writing and editing at the same time. It's not the best way to just write it, have the misspellings, have grammatical errors, go ahead and write it, come back later and clean it up. Same thing with design, right? You're trying to design and code at the same time, probably not going to have the most interesting kind of result, right? So allow yourself that time to kind of just dream and play. Sponsorship model, what if you could do it by Q2? That seems doable. And then you reverse engineer it and break it down. Well, what would that look like? You've got a list of folks. They're probably planning out 3 to 6 months in advance anyway, if they're bigger companies. So it actually works out for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. You're right on. You're right on, because that's the plan. Yeah, I was planning on, I've kind of got it started, but the plan is Q1 to really map it all out and make it sustainable for me and then roll it out. Yeah. Q2. I'm curious, have you seen sponsorships work in any way for service providers with a smaller list, or would you just advise just do, make the newsletter more of a personal thing to sell you versus selling sponsorship?
I do have a couple of clients that do it, and it's a little more integrated, and they're more in the speaker realm as opposed to service provider realm. It's an interesting idea. I've seen it probably more with folks who have built up an audience in terms of, maybe they're course creators, or they've got like a bigger community. They've got something kind of else behind it. I definitely see it with folks who are, bigger on social media. That's not to say it couldn't work for service providers. And it, sometimes we're like, what is the monetary thing, right? It could be for some people an extra $1,000 a month is all, that's real money, So it's also determination of like, oh, if I earn $1,000 a month, again, being ethical and transparent about it, would this make sense? Is this something that I want to integrate? It doesn't have to be like, oh, it's going to pay off the mortgage kind of money. You know what I mean? So there are things that I promote that certainly bring in a couple grand a month, that it's a nice revenue stream. If it ends, it's not the end of the world, but it's a nice kind of like cherry on top situation, right? So it's thinking about, how does it fit in with everything? Is it something in terms of timeline and management? Does it fit in? Does it take a lot of my resources, or is it like a nice additional revenue stream? Does it prevent me from doing other things that I want to do? And if not, maybe it makes sense in the overall kind of landscape of what you're doing.
Yeah, that's it right there. That's personally is what I've thought about. It's like, okay, what am I going to have to take away from in order to get the sponsorship stuff going? Exactly. I've got other priority items to worry about first. That's on the, not urgent priority, but not, or, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not urgent, but it's next up.
Yeah, it's there. And I will say there's one other aspect, and this doesn't come up too often, but it just came to me. There was, I can't remember what platform it was. It was some piece of software, and I can't remember if it was a shopping cart or something. And it came out that the guy who created it was going to jail for some real bad things. And a lot of folks who promoted it were like, I can no longer promote this, because what he was accused of was just awful. And so I think that is another consideration. In this day and age, we kind of have to research what we're putting our name behind.
Yeah.
And so if you can't, and I know it's like harping on ethics and stuff, but it is kind of one of those things. If you're promoting something and you don't do your due diligence, it kind of comes back as a reflection on you. I mean, it's certainly happened to me when I've recommended people. This is why I take no money. If I refer someone for web design work or I take no part of, I don't take a cut or anything. I keep it really, really clean, because I've had situations where, as we all, there's always 3 sides to a story, and, someone wasn't happy with work or something happened, and I feel bad because I made the connection, but it's still up to that person to vet and make sure that it's the right fit for them.
Yeah, great point. Well, this has been awesome, Michelle. I have one last question for you, but before we get to that, I know you're going to send over a ton of resources. We'll include in the show notes, but where should folks go to connect with you? Do you have is it your newsletter? Do you have a freebie? Where would you like folks to go?
Yes, I got a ton of freebies for you, which I'll make sure to send in the show notes. But minimumdesigns.com is my main website. I have a couple, I think, great resources. I'll share that content goldmine blog post. I have a couple of lead magnets that I think people will really enjoy. One about working with premium clients. That's specifically more towards web designers. So it's how to attract and retain premium clients. I've had one of my clients for over 12 years now, and we even do revenue share. So there's some beautiful, beautiful things that can happen with a long-term relationship. And then I have a brand new one that's coming out this week, actually, called Rich Inbox. And it's the unique ways that you can use your email list to generate power, money, and prestige, even if you've got a small or tiny list.
That's awesome. We'll link both of those. I think that one is going to be the priority one for this.
Oh yeah.
That'll be super, super time. We'll have all of this linked to the show notes, but I'll make sure that's like the featured link on that one, because that's what folks are looking for help with in the web design world. And because this is an area that I don't really, have expertise in per se, I'll rely on you to share all the good stuff. It's kind of a little bit of what I do, but not most of it. So it's been great. Yeah. My last question for you, Michelle, what has been your favorite newsletter that you have wrote?
Oh, wow. That's a great question.
Is there one that you were like, man, that was a humdinger, or got a lot of good responses that you were like, yeah.
I think when I get personal, in the last year I've had to go through some health stuff and some family stuff. And so sometimes I'm just like, here's where we're at right now. And I will tell you the outpouring of support and love and just like people who are going to show up for you. It just humbles you of just because sometimes, we're so detached. We're behind these microphones, sitting behind these desks, and we don't get to work in offices anymore. And we don't get to really connect with people often in a way where you can see the impact. And the times when I'm able to like go in person and people are like, your newsletter changed everything for me, or I made X amount of dollars. Someone told me they made close to $250,000 because I gave them an idea. And I was like, what was the idea? Like that to me, like, that's where I get so jazzed up, because when you can feel the impact of what you've written and what you've created and how you've helped someone, that's the most fulfilling thing I can do.
That's cool. So couple personal ones.
To you. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Michelle. Well, thank you so much. Again, minimumdesigns.com, and we'll have a bunch of these links in the show notes until you make Martello moves when you start dancing on TikTok.
There you go.
We'll keep this off for now. All right. Thanks for your time, Michelle. It's been great.
Thanks so much. It's so much fun.
What a banger to kick off the year here. I really hope you enjoyed that chat as much as I did having it with Michelle. Again, wealth of knowledge, a lot you can do as far as email marketing and content marketing in 2025. So I hope you can apply at least one of the tips and strategies that we covered. If it were me, I would do the content goldmine. In fact, I am going to do the content goldmine. I'm literally working. I have a Google Doc right now that already has like 30 plus little tips that are kind of my go-tos for my content goldmine that I'm going to be repurposing for social media and newsletter and all my content resources. So I would encourage you to do the same. Even if you're not an influencer or content marketer, you're still creating a lot of content for your clients. And by golly, what a shame to know so much and keep it in your brain when you could get it out on your content goldmine. So that's what I'd recommend, but I would love to hear from you. I know Michelle would love to hear from you as well. Go to the show notes for this episode. joshhall.co/361 is where all of that will be. You will get all of the links that Michelle mentioned that she did send over. And then again, you can connect with her at minimadesigns.com. And of course, that will all be linked over at the show notes for this one, joshhall.co/361. All right, friends, happy content marketing, happy email marketing, and cheers to a start of a very successful 2025 for you. I'm pumped to be a part of your web design business and to help you do that. And if you're not yet in my web design community, Web Designer Pro, I'd love to see you there. There's 3 tiers now. You can get access to all the courses or the community or coaching with me directly, which gives you access to absolutely everything on the top tier. Go to webdesignerpro.com to join us there, and can't wait to help be a part of your business in 2025. Cheers.